Hi, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Today we're talking with Kyle Mackey, who is the North Idaho field representative for the Idaho Wildlife Federation. We're talking with him about Idaho HB 469, a bill that's waiting to go to committee in Idaho, and how it could change and set a precedent for changes for muzzleloader seasons in Idaho. Full disclosure, a representative from the Idaho Wildlife Federation reached out to inform me about this change. They have their opinion about this bill as it heads into committee. But I do my best to ask some questions from both sides. And as of recording, I am working on connecting with the committee chair to get his side of this story and why he thinks this bill should pass.
My name is Kyle Mackey. I am the North Idaho field rep for the Idaho Wildlife Federation. Live in northern Idaho, Potlatch. I don't know if probably not real familiar with the layout of Idaho, but kind of where it narrows down into the narrow northern part. I'm at kind of the southern edge of that. So,
Okay. Gotcha.
I grew up Upper Peninsula, Michigan, just always outside, hunting, fishing, trapping, doing it all. And yeah, we made the move out here, I don't know, 8 or so years ago, and just taking advantage of everything Idaho has to offer when it comes to outdoor stuff.
That's fantastic. So what about the Idaho Wildlife Federation? What does it do, and how does that relate to kind of this conversation that we're having here?
Yeah, so Idaho Wildlife Federation, it's a nonprofit sportsman org. Started up, I believe, in 1936, and then a couple of years after that, 1938, kind of helped pass the first the voter initiative to form an independent fish game commission to kind of take that wildlife season policy setting stuff from the legislature and go to a science-based end of things, and manage it through best available science rather than the desires of politicians and the people that fund their stuff.
Right. So does the Wildlife Federation work alongside the Idaho Fish and Game?
We are completely separate, 501c3 nonprofit. We do work with Fish and Game on certain things, work adjacent to them. Sometimes we input on things that we don't think is the way things should be managed, and we'll give that to them. But we have a very good working relationship with them, but very much separate.
That's good to know. So you guys make your voices heard on issues that you see affecting sportsmen, and how you would like the seasons and the game populations to be managed based on that scientific look at it.
Exactly. Yep.
Do you personally hunt with a muzzleloader?
Yeah, it's more for me. It's more of an opportunity thing. I am not I would not call myself a muzzleloader, but I do it. I mean, it's always been just that little extra opportunity. Didn't grow up doing it.
That's okay.
Maybe hunted a couple times, a handful of days here and there. And then out here now we have some unique opportunities for muzzleloading out here. Some of our elk zones, they have additional muzzleloading opportunity after whatever some of the stuff I hunt. There's primarily an archery season, and then there's kind of a supplemental, oftentimes cow hunts later on in the year.
Okay.
If you didn't fill your tag. So I take advantage of that. Shot a cow with muzzleloader doing that. 2 years ago I had a muzzleloader elk tag and I shot a nice 6-point bull with that. And yeah, it's always just that taking advantage of every opportunity I can. I like hunting, whether it's a muzzleloader, rifle, bow. If there was a special spear season, I'd probably take advantage of that if I could.
We could see that, man. I'm seeing that a lot more of that on Instagram right now. Those guys get good at throwing those. I got contacted by somebody else on your team about Idaho HB 469. Last week. Could you tell the listeners and the viewers about that and what brought it to your attention at the Idaho Wildlife Federation here?
HB 469, it's in response to a rule that the Fish and Game, Idaho Department of Fish and Game, they submitted to the legislature. So some of our Fish and Game rules have to go through the rulemaking process and then be approved by the legislature. It all started last year due to just hearing from different sportsmen. They wanted some changes to what we could use for muzzleloading bullets. Idaho is pretty restrictive. We have to use loose powder. We cannot use 209 primers, so we either have to use percussion caps, musket caps, flintlock, and we have no scopes, so only iron sights. You can use peep sights.
Yeah.
And the bullets, the wording was previously had to be I don't have the exact word, but it had to be composed, I think it's wholly of lead or lead alloy.
Yeah.
Some people were or talking about just being frustrated with their lack of options from some people I heard. I don't know. I think that's kind of a stretch, but I get it. You roll into a sporting goods store the day before season, like so many people unfortunately do, and you don't have a whole lot when it comes to just lead bullets.
Right.
And then also some people are talking, they wanted the option to be able to shoot like an all copper bullet for health reasons and being worried about lead in meat. So I get the reasoning. So Fish and Game went through the rulemaking process. They took input from sportsmen. I believe it was something like 75% of sportsmen approved of this rule change, which all it did was go from a bullet need to be comprised wholly of lead or lead alloy to allowing just a bullet. It didn't matter if there's copper involved. And then also it made some just little allowances for what they call pressure bases or accuracy tips. So basically a tip bullet and a pressure base on the bottom with similar like a power belt or something to that effect.
Yeah, some kind of gas seal at the base.
Exactly. So they went through that, a lot of public support. And that being said, there were definitely people opposed to it who wanted to keep that traditional, keep it as traditional as possible.
Right.
But the vast majority wanted that change, or were at least okay with that change. So after all of that, we're talking almost a year to the process now. Our legislature is now in session, and this has to come before legislature to get approved. And there was some opposition from one of the members on the House Resources and Conservation Committee, and basically he is a muzzleloader hunter, and he voices opinion in some of the public meetings and whatnot that he wanted sabots and 209 primers, pelletized powder, all that allowed. So basically, it kind of got held up in committee, and then as a result of that, he brought forward this HB 469 to kind of amend what Fish and Game was putting forward and basically get pelletized powder, 209s, and sabots allowed. So that's kind of the roundabout way of how we got to where we are.
Right. So last fall, I was written by just a sportsman in Idaho about that proposed rule change. And there was a lot of, I produced a video about it. It was a lot of interesting comments and discussion going on there because that original proposed rule change back last fall, I believe, was solely focused on the material the bullets were made out of. It did not expand into sabots, but it did allow things, I believe, things like the pressure bases that you see on things like the power belt bullets and the Hornady ELDX bullet that came out last year, where it had that pressure base. So that proposed rule change went before the legislature, and this HB 469 is coming in then, correct me if I'm wrong, and proposing an expansion on those proposed changes and deciding that via the legislature, not via the Fish and Game. Is that correct?
Yeah, and then, for the most part, there were a few public meetings also around that time regarding this, and they did talk about previous to some of those meetings that they were scoping for just the bullets themselves, but they'd also received comments about sabots, 209s, etc. And they basically said they're taking all comments into account. So while they weren't specifically scoping for it, there was mention of it, and there's about 475 comments they got from folks, and only about 9% of them spoke positively about wanting to see a change to 209s and sabots. So
yeah,
they weren't specifically scoping that, yet they did see a little support for it, but not a whole lot. I mean, less than 10%. So if they were scoping specifically for it, the support, I would guess probably would have been a little higher, but still, I would guess below the majority.
Okay. So it sounds like there was kind of a taking of the temperature, we'll say, of muzzleloading enthusiasts and muzzleloading hunters in Idaho to see
how they were feeling in a contemporary sense. Because based on my understanding of these wildlife departments, there's kind of a balance between what the sportsmen and hunters are looking for in contrast or in line with the populations of game and the seasons and the wildlife. I mean, that's the management part of it, is balancing those two sides of the coin, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's the problem. The more advancements you need in technology, whether it's archery, long range rifle, muzzleloading, as you get more effective, there's only a couple levers you can pull. You're either restricting tags or you're shortening seasons. So
right. And that's the job that has to be done. I mean, that's conservation at its base levels, pulling those levers to make sure that you're balancing that. So what's the IDWF stance then on this HB 469, to be fully transparent about it?
Yeah, so our stance, it's kind of complicated because we are definitely strongly opposing this change. Our view is these type of rule changes should not be done in the state house. These should be done through science. They should be involved in more of a public process through the Fish Game Commission. If this all went through in our opinion, the proper avenues of the public scoping process, I mean, all that, we likely would not be taking a position on it. But going this way, this is one person essentially deciding, I don't want this, I want this changed, and not involving the public. And some of the wording in the bill itself, it also talks about the inability for Fish and Game to restrict the use of 209s, sabots, and all that. So it's not even there's no allowance in there for Fish and Game this is too effective. We can no longer allow these sorts of technologies for muzzleloaders. In our opinion, it is just not the proper way to do fish and game management at all. So we're strongly opposed to it.
So it sounds like it's kind of on a technicality, you might say, bypassing the way that these kinds of rule changes have been done in the past, and taking it outside of the process and dictating the process rather than going along with the process and making sure that it all lines up with that balancing act of the fish and game departments.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the right way to say it.
Okay.
That being said, some of the other reasons we are opposed is talking with folks at Fish and Game and just knowing how these different technologies can affect your effectiveness with hunting. It's like while we're not allowing scopes or anything, there's the potential for this to increase the effectiveness, and we don't want to see our opportunities restricted further. We want to have as much opportunity as possible. So while we're opposing it from the technical aspect of how it's happening, a lot of that is also tied back to what this change will do for the potential of muzzleload hunting in the state.
Right. It was in. You can correct me if I'm wrong again, but when you have a rule change like this that can go through legislatively, there might not be as much scientific research going into it to test and poll and figure out, possible outcomes of that kind of opening up of the possible effectiveness of the arm that's being used. It's just kind of, here's what we want to do, go do it, rather than saying, how is this going to affect things for the game and the system in general?
That's exactly right. Because this was read in committee. No one really knew what it was. It came up. Now it's been printed. And now we're just sitting here waiting for this bill to be brought before that committee again. And we might get a 1 or 2 day notice when it's on the agenda, and people can sign up to testify. You get your 2 or 3 minutes, and once if it makes it out of committee, that's the rigorous debate that will happen before it gets brought to the whole house, and then if it passes the house onto the Senate side. So it's a pretty expedited process with not a ton of opportunity for public comment on it.
Okay.
Much less review of scientific literature and whatnot on it. So
right. So I've read a little bit about this, and again, I'm not in Idaho, so I'm just kind of finding what information is available to me. And I'm finding, I think it's the Idaho Freedom Foundation, I could be wrong, is supporting this because of it's opening up and or letting go of restrictions of sportsman and hunter rights in Idaho, where you're seeing a decrease in restricting of freedom. What would you say to folks out there that say this doesn't stop you from hunting with a traditional muzzleloader? It doesn't mean that you can't, hunt the hard way. It's opening it up and making things less restrictive for sportsmen across the board who see that as a good thing.
I mean, if we want to make things less restrictive, why have archery or muzzleloader seasons? I mean, right. Those are in place to increase opportunity without hurting the animal populations. If we're worried about just having ultimate freedom on everything, let's just have a year-round rifle season, if that's what we really want. But that's not responsible.
Right.
It's a bit extreme to put it that way, but it's kind of true.
Right. It is kind of the story of the camel under the camel's nose under the tent. Here in Indiana, we have a very open muzzleloader season. But that doesn't stop people, hunting with a flintlock and a percussion, side lock like I do a lot. But I know a lot of folks who hunt with an inline muzzleloader and enjoy it just as much as they do with their rifle season. I'm more interested in how and why these things happen. Because I find it really fascinating. And across the country here, with these muzzleloader season rule changes, we're getting more and more into these technicalities of the process, of the rulemaking process, and of how the Fish and Wildlife departments work. And we're seeing these kind of changes happen because of the rulemaking process, or how that system functions over how many of us might feel or might hope that it would function. And that's why I appreciate you answering that question, because I know it wasn't, you're not necessarily trying to sway people's opinion on it, because it's not up to the public at this point. It's in this kind of legislative process for right now. But we're seeing this happen across the country, where these changes are happening with the system separate from how we might think that it should behave. So I do appreciate that.
I mean, that's the unique thing about out here, where some of our different rules, like you can still use any type of muzzleloader you want. You could use it in the rifle season if you want. So those technologies that are in this specific legislation are already available to use then. We also have what we call a short range weapon hunts. So sometimes they're within certain boundaries, and maybe for safety reasons, they don't want people shooting rifles or within certain areas, or just certain hunts they've decided to have these short range weapons, which you can use any type of muzzleloader. You can use a scope muzzleloader. You can use a shotgun with slugs, a crossbow. So there is already a space for these advanced muzzleloaders. But yeah, me personally, I don't think they have a place in muzzleloading. Period.
Yeah.
In these type of more, I guess, historic type seasons, traditional seasons.
So along those lines, my next question is, based on your understanding, would this bill prevent a strictly primitive muzzleloading season from being enacted in Idaho? Because right now, based on what I've read, Idaho doesn't have any language around their rules about it being primitive or traditional or historical. There's not really any mention of that. The arms themselves in the current rule structure are just kind of locked into that. The more primitive style ignition systems, but it doesn't say anywhere that it needs to be that. So if this passes, could Idaho ever have a traditional or historic muzzleloading season like we just saw implemented in Montana a couple years ago?
I mean, I think we could, but it would then have to go through the legislative process again.
Okay.
Even if this bill doesn't go through, to go back to call it more of like the heritage season that Montana implemented, it would still have to be the same process that was done for the change of bullet composition for Fish and Game. They would have to scope it to the public. They'd have to get approval from the Fish and Game Commission, and then bring it before the legislature and have them approve it as well.
I mean, that was my primary concern, really, reading this. The way the wording was done, it seemed like the Fish and Game Department wouldn't be able to in the future restrict those items from a season. And we're seeing increased interest in that opportunity of a traditional historical season or heritage season. And I hope that Idaho doesn't miss out on the chance to do that. But it sounds like from what you're saying here, that could be, offered as not necessarily a legal amendment, but a just speaking here, an amendment to that, allowing that kind of more restrictive season in the future. If that,
I think it'd be much more difficult if this bill passes to do that.
Okay.
But I get technically, like I said, it could still happen, but not with this rule in place if it does pass.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's
and that's just my take on it. I may be off on that. I'm not the guy, the lobbyist down the state house. That's my boss, and he can have that job.
Right. Yeah, I have no interest in that. Do you think there's anything behind this flurry of rule change proposals, or is this just kind of a cyclical part of the wildlife management process here in Idaho? We've seen a lot of changes around the country here lately in the past few years, and I'm just wondering if there's any particular pressure that you are seeing or feeling in Idaho steering towards this, this kind of opening up of the muzzleloader season.
I think it really came from just Fish and Game hearing from the sporting public that some folks wanted to see that bullet change initially, and then once they opened that can of worms, it just kind of happened.
Right. Can't put it back.
If that wasn't brought up before, we might not be here talking about this today. So I think that was kind of an unfortunate result of Fish and Game, the Fish and Game Commission doing what they're supposed to be doing and hearing from the sportsmen of the state and exploring different possibilities. And then it just kind of got snowballing and it rolled into where we are now. And it's kind of a shame looking at where some of the other states are going. You look at like Utah, just restricting scope muzzleloaders. And these other states are stepping back their regulations for muzzleloading and making them more restrictive. And then here we are potentially allowing for newer technologies. So it's interesting where we are now. We have so many people who just care about hunting, fishing, wildlife, all this now. We have and it's great to see all these people getting into it and the just more interest in it. But then at the same time, you have a limited resource. So you got to balance that, the opportunities, the technologies available. And it's a tough job. I don't envy the Fish and Game agencies throughout the states.
Yeah. Is Idaho feeling pressure from the popularity increase of Western big game hunting, of both in and out of state tags, or is it stayed pretty stable over the past few years?
That's are we starting a whole new podcast here? That could be a whole new series.
sorry. That's something that came to my mind as we were talking.
No, it's a great question because we hear that a lot. We just had some changes 2 or 3 years ago now with how we allocate our elk and deer tags, and it made it for non-residents. It changed now. You have to buy a unit specific tag for a deer or a elk zone specific. So before you could just buy, there was a number of kind of over the counter opportunities for non-residents, and we have been restricted for quite a while as far as the numbers. I don't know how long, 30, 40, I don't know how long the numbers have been there, but it's always about, I guess, 13,000 or so non-resident elk tags and about 15,000 non-resident deer tags. Those numbers have been capped for a long time. But once they changed the rules, so you had to, not only were they capped, but they were capped by specific zone and then even on to the unit basis. That created kind of a flurry of non-residents wanting to ensure that they got a tag where they wanted to. Our tags are selling out very quickly for non-residents. We have a December 1st sale for non-resident deer and elk tags, and I think they were all sold out within, 12 hours or something this year. So It's a little crazy. So that's one end of it. That being said, our non-resident numbers aren't changing. They've been stable because they've been capped. What we do have is a ton of people moving into the state. So a lot more resident hunters as well. And there's there's a lot of pressure on the wildlife. That being said, there's still plenty of opportunity for people to get out, get the experience they want. I mean, if you want to go into some of those areas that are highly sought after and have a lot of game, great, but you're probably gonna have to deal with other people. Or you can go for that backcountry experience where there's not as many deer and elk running around and get that feeling that I like, that adventure that you just don't know what you're gonna run into, and you frankly don't know if you're gonna run into anything you can shoot or not. So there's plenty of opportunity for everyone out there, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear, because I think that's part of the ongoing discussion, especially in the Western states, is we've just seen this massive increase in interest, and it's been brought up a lot by my viewers and my listeners. That it's not necessarily the muzzleloader rules that are the cause of this, but we need to take into account the changes in population that are happening right now, and the kind of the hunting industry as it moves around and ebbs and flows. So that's very interesting to hear from you there in Idaho. Is there anything else that you'd like to direct viewers to, and any links or articles or content, anything you'd like to direct people towards to learn more about the organization or anything?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some. But I guess the one thing before we go to that is just kind of hitting on that importance of managing fish and game populations, the seasons, all that through a scientific process. The legislature is not the place to be setting these rules. We just had another one pop up yesterday in one of the Senate committees, wanting to basically allow guides and outfitters, if they shoot a wolf in their unit, they can get what we call a trophy tag, which is for either a moose, a sheep, or a goat. And it's one of the things that you look at, and it likely won't go anywhere as far as moving through and becoming law, but that's not the place to be setting these policies. It is at the fish and game level, the commission level, using science, not I guess the whims of legislatures.
That can be risky, and I think we've seen that across the board. Not inside and outside of muzzleloading. Not to get off topic, but you can set that precedent on one thing that might make sense to a majority or a lot of people, and you don't know how that can be used down the road, which can get concerning when you're talking about a finite resource like a lot of those natural resources that we're talking about here. That's interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, so I guess back to your original question, where to send people.
Yeah.
So we have a few things on our website, just idahowildlife.org, and I can send them to you. We put a blog post up, I think it was last week, just kind of talking about this specific muzzleloader issue. And we do have a form you can fill your info in and send it in, and that will be sent in opposing the language, the change. So people can do that if they want. We also have on our website an Idaho Wildlife called the Idaho Wildlife Bill Tracker, and you can see any of the bills that have been introduced that relate to fish, wildlife, habitat, public access, anything that can affect sportsmen in the state. And we have a brief description of what the bill is, what it could do, whether we oppose it, whether we support it. And so there's that there as well. And then I would just say, if anybody wants to get involved with this specifically, that is a good place to do it. You can sign up for our emails, and you can get updates on some of these things when they come in. You can, we will be sending out emails to folks when this specific bill is on the agenda for the House Resources Committee, and people can sign to testify if they would like to testify for it. And then along with that, I can also send you the link to the committee itself. If folks want to call in, there's a phone number you can call, and you can leave a message on, whether hopefully that you oppose the bill, but I guess if you support it, have at it. But you can leave a message there. You can send emails to folks on the committee, and just say why you oppose it.
Well, I think it's good to let people know how they can get active. I think I hear a lot of frustration about that when it pertains to muzzleloading rules, but I think the more all of us are active in voicing how we feel about it, I mean, hopefully, our voices are heard, and that's taken into account for the process. That's how it's supposed to work. So I hope that it's still that way. So I appreciate you letting people know how to make their voice heard on this.
and it's tough because people feel, sportsmen especially, feel that it's hard to get involved with the rulemaking process anyways when it goes
Yes.
through the proper channels. And then this is even one step removed from that. So it's not always fun and easy and convenient to sign up to testify before the legislature, but it's 2 or 3 minutes of your day. So it can have a real impact on them when you have a number of sportsmen showing up to oppose something like this. And I think it really speaks volumes when you have a strong showing for when a bill like this pops up.
Yeah. So if you could say anything to the chairman of this committee about this, what would you say? If they were listening now to this, not that they won't be listening, but
yeah. What I would say is, man, that's a tough one right off the top of my head. Probably I would just look at what do we want? What do we want for the opportunities for people in the future? A lot of my job, I'm not doing this for me. I look at my kids. I want my kids to have a lot of these same opportunities that I've had. If we keep moving in the direction of more and more technology, we're just going to have to restrict tag numbers. We're going to have to restrict seasons. And I would much rather have to use a more primitive weapon and still have that opportunity to get out and hunt. And I want my kids to have the same opportunities.
I think that's great. As a father myself, I totally understand that. It's, even if you're not getting anything, it's still nice to have the opportunity to go out there and take your muzzleloader for a walk, as I do very often, because I don't bring a whole lot home.
Yep, totally agree.
Well, Kyle, thank you for dealing with my off the top of my head questions. Sometimes stuff comes to mind that I didn't write down, so I appreciate you answering those, and I think you did very well with it.
No, thanks for just having me on. I appreciate it. It's nice to get in here and talk about these kind of things. And sometimes the conversations, they just kind of flow, and you start talking about things that you didn't plan, and a lot of times it works out great, and you kind of go down little rabbit holes and never know what might pop up.
Awesome. Is there anything that we might have missed?
Yeah, I can't really think anything.
Okay.
Just encourage people to check out the Idaho Wildlife Federation and sign up for some emails. You want to stay up to date on what's going on in Idaho. And if you're not in Idaho, get a hold of whoever's in your state. Try to get more involved with conservation of things. And got to be involved in the process to have a voice, and just encourage people to do it.
Awesome. That's a message I can get behind for sure. This podcast is brought to you by Muzzleloader Magazine, the publication for traditional black powder shooters. Since 1974, Muzzleloader has been the leading magazine devoted to traditional black powder hunting and shooting. Each issue is jam-packed with articles on hunting, shooting, gunsmithing, do-it-yourself projects, living history, American history, book and product reviews, and much, much more. Muzzleloader Magazine is the best traditional muzzleloading magazine, bar none. I'd like to thank Jason at Muzzleloader Magazine for his continued support of I Love Muzzleloading and the I Love Muzzleloading podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Thor Bullets. Thor Bullets are a premium full-bore muzzleloader bullet designed specifically for modern inline rifles. Thor Bullets do not require plastic sabots or belts to be fired, meaning less cleaning for you between shots. The patented copper base creates an airtight seal, giving you greater distance and accuracy. Thor's unique engineering allows the bullets to retain 95% of their weight upon impact, and the controlled expansion ensures large, easy-to-follow blood trails. Thor bullets are currently available in a 50 caliber version that is sized to your specific bore. Thor is also expanding into a new 45 caliber bullet designed for faster 1 in 24 and 1 in 22 twist inline rifles. For more information on these great bullets, visit www.thorbullets.com. We'd like to thank Thor Bullets for their sponsorship of this podcast.
I'd like to thank Kyle for his time in discussing this. We went through a lot, and there are a lot of questions just off the top of my head as we were talking. So I appreciate him being such a good sport and answering everything that I had on the spot. We'll have more information about this bill, like I said, as we reach out to other folks to get their opinions at ilovemuzzleloading.com. If you're interested in any of the sources or links that Kyle talked about. We'll have those in the show notes as well as with the episode blog at ilovemuzzleloading.com. I'm curious about your thoughts. These muzzleloader season changes or proposed changes seem to be coming up a lot in the western states. What do you think about it? Do you think this is the encroachment of modern technology into these more old school muzzleloading seasons? Or do you think this is a result of the increased interest in big game hunting out west? Kind of like Kyle talked about there, shifting demographics, out-of-state tags versus in-state tags. There's a whole lot going on here. And I think based on what I'm seeing, the kind of old sleepy muzzleloader season is getting kicked up, getting dust thrown at it here, getting kind of put into the center of quite a bit of things that are happening between sportsmen and the population of sportsmen, state game agencies, and the hunting industry as a whole. So I'm doing my best to keep tabs on this and keep everybody as informed as I can. If there's anything like this that comes up in your state, please don't hesitate to reach out to ilovemuzzleloading@gmail.com. I love hearing about this stuff and figuring out how and why it's happening so that we can better educate muzzleloading enthusiasts in those states and spread the word when something like this is happening. So everybody on either side of an issue like this can get involved in this rulemaking and decision-making process. I think that is part of the backbone of the United States, and I think it's important for us to get involved, especially at a local level here, with changes like this and other local government issues. Getting back to interviews next week, we've got a couple more scheduled I'm really excited about. I hope that you stick around for those. Got some interesting gun builders and historians on the queue here for the rest of 2024. Once again, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.